Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Jared Hornsby, and I'm here today to help answer any general or technical questions that you may have. But before we get started, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Unlocking the Potential of a Full-Scale Digital Transformation. At any point during today's webinar, if you have a question, please do not hesitate to submit using the Ask a Question tab at the left side of your screen. And you can also chat with your fellow attendees by clicking the audience chat also at the left side of your screen. We also have some great resources available for you in the Resources tab. I'd like to thank today's sponsors, Adobe and WillowTree, for making today's webinar possible. WillowTree partners with the world's leading brands like Adobe to help them tackle their thorniest challenges. Over on the sponsor side today, we have two great speakers for you. We have Tony Ferreira, the Senior Growth Director at WillowTree, and Joanne Taggart, the Personalization Lead at TELUS. Feel free to take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Jared. And hello, everybody. Really just quick note for everybody to understand sort of the format here. This is kind of going to be a virtual fireside chat. So if you have questions, send them in. We'll just be answering some general questions as we go, but bringing in some of your questions as they see fit. And then we'll get to a lot of them at the end as well. So as Jared said, my name is Tony Ferreira. I'm the Senior Growth Director at WillowTree, focused on Adobe MarTech solutions. I have close to 20 years of experience that span engineering, customer data, technology, marketing, and strategy. And for the last 15 years, I've really been specializing in the Adobe Experience Cloud platforms. And with me, as Jared said, is Joanne Taggart from TELUS, which is all capitals in case you're curious. But Joanne, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little about yourself?
Yes, hi everybody. Nice to see you all. My name is Joanne Taggart. I'm part of TELUS. I'm the personalization lead here. I have been at TELUS for close to 12 years, and in that time, my career has spanned from digital experiences, self-serve, and then getting into A/B testing, and now currently we're leading the personalization practice towards automation and real-time streaming of outbound digital messages, including push app, in-app, SMS, and emails across the organization.
And just so everyone is aware, WillowTree has been partnering with TELUS for a little over a year now, where we've been supporting their efforts in all of their Adobe platforms, from strategy implementation through program enablement, just so that is out on the table. So let's get started. So Joanne, I think a great place to start is just to tell us a little bit about your background and your path within TELUS to get you to where you are today.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess I joined TELUS just nearly 12 years ago. I've always been really fond of the data and experience intersection, just looking at how we can use data to augment and improve the customer experience. When I joined TELUS Digital, it was a startup of 50 people inside a 100-year-old telco. So we have gone through quite a digital transformation inside here. I started working on a registration flow for my TELUS, but that registration flow and the conversion rate optimization therein led me to a career in A/B testing and getting closer and closer to all these amazing tools, A/B testing, personalization, and we stood up an A/B testing practice. And now that has led us to where we are today, expanding organization-wide across outbound channels as well.
How many people now work inside TELUS?
TELUS itself is a massive company. It's 80,000 plus employees. Inside TELUS Digital, which has now been amalgamated into the main Chief Information Office, we're now close to 1,000 people.
That is a pretty big jump in 12 years. I'm sure you've gone through a lot. So Definitely. On that note, let's chat a little bit about the Adobe platforms that your team owns and the roles that those platforms play within the organization.
Yes, so the biggest platform that my team is currently owning is the new Adobe Experience Platform. This has been, however, a journey to get here. We're using Adobe Experience Platform and Adobe Journey Optimizer, but we started in our early days with implementations of Adobe Analytics, Adobe Target, and Adobe Audience Manager. And after about 5 years of using those tools, we have now evolved into Adobe Experience Platform.
And a quick little public service announcement for all of those listening who may not be as well versed in sort of the Adobe ecosystem. So Adobe Experience Platform is both a product and an ecosystem in the sort of like new MarTech space for Adobe. It's a data lake where you can house your data. You can do some data manipulation and some querying, but then it also powers other tools like the real-time CDP for segmentation, Adobe Journey Optimizer, which you'll sometimes hear referred to as AJO, which does journey orchestration and one-to-one personalization for messaging. And then CJA, which is Customer Journey Analytics, which is really their BI tool focused on connecting both digital and non-digital data for analysis. So throughout the course of the conversation, you'll hear some of those terms. I just want to make sure everybody is kind of aligned to what we're talking about. So let's move into some challenges that typically happen when you're trying to bring in these tools, right? And one of those top challenges when you're investing in new technology is getting executive or leadership buy-in. So how did you work through this at TELUS?
Yes, leadership buy-in is definitely super important. And I think the more you have, the more you can do. But in order to get it, you need to just sort of start with your core ideas. Start small with grassroots ideas. Maybe your top 3 or 5 use cases is all you really need. And show the value. Build some proofs of concept. Show what's possible. Build those things out and make sure that you're starting to show and share the value that those experiences or proofs of concept are bringing to your business, and show the potential. And do that with, screenshots, visuals, but also with numbers. Show how, these experiences will lead to extra sales or less calls, and make sure that you quantify those things. So start with the scope that you know that you have and build your momentum from there. Another thing that's been really helpful for us at TELUS is a group of stakeholder peers. We're not just leading this personalization at scale from within the CIO, Chief Information Office team. We're partnered across marketing and service teams as well. And we have a group of peers that we work with that we talk about different use cases and ideas with. And we start to position our program then at the center of many of the discussions. Like every time there's a opportunity or a use case that's being discussed, you can kind of continue to show how solutions that you're working on might help or contribute to some of those problems. And then keep on building. Like every time you have like 2 or 3 use cases, with every conversation, you'll probably get 2 or 3 more, and just keep building from small, and eventually it starts to grow. And then the last piece I'll say is that, eventually you are going to get the leadership buy-in that you need, and just make sure to use your leadership team for what they're there for, which is to, help you expand across the company, help you remove any roadblocks, and just keep in constant contact with them.
Yeah, I think, to your point there, communication is critical, right? To making sure that the people buying in are the ones who know what is happening, so that they're not having to constantly come to you and ask for updates. You're more so proactively giving it to them so that these tools can be used for what they need to be used for without any sort of blockers put in the way, which actually leads to a very interesting point that sort of leads people into some challenges when they get buy-in and they start implementing these tools. Adobe, much like other enterprise technologies, have a bit of a learning curve for people who aren't used to them. So I'm curious, how are you able to support your team in learning these new platforms?
Yes. These platforms definitely are sort of like, you have to get into them to really know them. But also what's really helpful is to have a reason to learn it. So a lot of people will just take a technology and take a course and try to just understand how the tool works. But if you haven't got a purpose for what you're doing with the tool, I find that it's a lot harder to learn. So as you're taking on that very first or second use case, give your team the time and space inside that use case for the hands-on experimentation, trial and error, and build in all of the time to read documentation, figure things out, test things out, etc. That got us so far. And then actually for TELUS, WillowTree helped us immensely last year to just accelerate that piece. We were finding we had a lot of questions, and they were able to help us work towards our very first near real-time use case. The other piece that really helped our team is that once you're in one or two of the Adobe tools, you can be in a lot of the other ones with, I would say, more relative ease. And my team did already start with background experience with Adobe Analytics, with Adobe Target and Adobe Audience Manager, which did make the learning curve to Adobe Experience Platform much better. And then the other piece is that inside TELUS, we're not starting totally from scratch with these tools, because we've done a lot of work over the last many years with the rest of the tools, and also with some of our in-house data lake platform, Google Cloud platform, that has helped sort of accelerate or give us a lot of stepping stones that we didn't have to start over from scratch.
So there's an interesting point that you kind of brought up there, which I'm glad. You named other technologies outside of Adobe, right? And I think there's really no ecosystem, especially enterprise-wide, that I've run into where there's only been like a single vendor tool set that made up the entire ecosystem, right? And especially in your current ecosystem, Adobe isn't the only platform that you guys use. So I'm curious if you can kind of describe how you're using both Adobe, some other commercial platforms, and some homegrown systems that you've built to your advantage.
Yes, for sure. So we have a model of all of the systems that we use that starts all the way from the data sources, and then how we collect the data and build insights and propensity models and things like that on those data sources, all the way to taking action on those insights in the form of customer experiences, and then a feedback loop. So in TELUS, we've got GCP, Google Cloud Platform, is the foundation for all of our data. And we've also been investing heavily in a lot of homegrown, like TELUS, inside TELUS, data science, machine learning, and propensity models that have helped us along the way. So Adobe does play a role, but in the discussions that we've had in terms of what role Adobe plays, it's a very fluid discussion, and we're always talking about, is this something that we should, continue to rely on the TELUS in-house solution, or is this something that actually Adobe would do better, or could complement us in some other way? So we definitely very much have a mixture, and it's always top of mind to make sure that our the investments that we've already made in certain tools aren't lost or thrown away, and that we're not duplicating things by using Adobe, but rather just figuring out how they best complement.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, right? Sometimes when people start investing in these new technologies, they sort of only think of rip and replace as the way to bring them into the system rather than additive or build on. And they're usually focused on, how do we enable a specific use case within this ecosystem? So something I'm very curious about is sort of what has this integration between all of these systems enabled for you from a use case perspective?
I think primarily what it's enabled is our ability to go to market quickly with a new use case, because we're not starting from the ground up every single time. Like, a lot of times we've already got data signals in place and we just need to plug them in. What we've uncovered is there are a lot of teams across TELUS that are doing really, really cool stuff. And it's by bringing all of those things together that you can create a really cool customer experience. And a good example that we've just been working on is a team that has been able to detect when a customer has had a power cut at their house, and that would affect potentially their internet and TV services. And so we're able to take that existing signal, but plug it into a new technology that allows us to actually communicate to the customer in real time, and then measure back. And so I would say the life cycle of having brought that to market was much faster, integrating with systems we already have versus starting over, because we were not building everything, we're just adding stuff.
Yeah, I think, and another one just that sort of sits on top of that we were a part of for another business unit was integrating these Adobe platforms into some microservices that could attach to the TV services. So basically being able to send out messages to other channels. And in that case, we were taking over sort of your smart TV and being able to send you a message that was critical to you at that point. So there's a lot of power in these tools and the ways that things sort of can get enabled. And with all that said, you get it implemented, you get the buy-in, you're using it, you're doing all these things. Usually at that point, there needs to be this sort of like rediscovering of like the overall purpose, right? And a lot of times you hear the word North Star, like what are we going towards? How do we get there? I'm very curious, before we get into the more personalization focused stuff, of just kind of what advice you might give to anyone out there who's trying to align this sort of data infrastructure and their technology stack more towards that like new North Star.
That is a really interesting, kind of tough question to answer, because when you think of your company's North Star, it's always three pieces. It's people, process, and technology, but also it's sort of like, where is your company trying to go? What are the goals of your whole organization? And digital and technologies really just need to fit into that. So I think it starts with understanding what the corporate goals of your organization are. A lot of people would probably relate to goals like, trying to increase sales and decrease costs in the form of decreasing the number of calls you get into the call center. But over the time that I've worked with these tools, I've also had to answer the question many times, like, what do these new tools give us that we can't already do because we already have all of these other cool things? So you really need to define that North Star and what you mean when you say like omni-channel or, a full-scale digital experience. Start to paint the picture with a clear example of, just one maybe customer experience that you mean, and then really expand that vision to be what could it look like in 5-10 years. And a lot of times also what has been helpful for us is looking at all of these wishes that you probably have and experience improvements that you're trying to make and bringing it back to numbers and quantification. Like, what are the different key performance indicators that you're actually going to be able to move with this technology? We've talked a lot about reducing speed to market in TELUS. Like, how long does it take from an idea to get an experience ready? What is the data latency? Does it, is your data a week behind, a day behind, an hour behind, or a minute behind? And how long does it take the team members that are actually building these experiences to create that? And if we're able to actually quantify a reduction, that is also very helpful. So yeah, I think a galvanizing story is something that is really helpful. If you've got like this one shining example that you keep repeating over and over to anyone that will listen, eventually that is the example. And if it resonates with enough of your team and enough of your leadership, it starts to be the thing where you just say, I'm going to solve this, and this is what I need. And then you'll get the priority on the key use cases that you have. And what else can I say? Maybe Tony, I'm gonna save some of these other points that I've got because I feel like it might be more relevant for some of the questions.
Okay, perfect. Well, and so, since the bigger topic we are talking about is digital transformation, and a very big component of that is personalization, right? I mean, for the last 5 years, that has been sort of a topic that everybody has been trying to figure out and gain capabilities around or unlock in certain ways. And it is a very significant role in a lot of these initiatives around transformation and digital initiatives. I'm very curious, like, what are the key challenges that TELUS, is either facing now or that has gone through around personalization?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think luckily we're very much beyond the point where we're having to justify the need for personalization. Everybody is talking about how a personalized experience translates to better sales, better customer service outcomes, pretty much better everything. But yes, there are definitely challenges. And I think some of the key ones that we've faced is things like the amount of manual effort that's involved to make an experience look seamless, but actually there's a lot of data transformations, files moving around, data in silos that you're stitching together. So I think the main one, yes, is data and manual effort. I once actually saw a slide that showed like the personalized experience that you see on the surface is like a duck sitting on a calm pond. And really what's happening underneath is the feet are paddling madly to try and just keep up. And so there's this illusion of personalization. So I think, but as your company starts to really, get behind personalization and want to scale it, the manual effort that's involved can get in the way. And so that's why you've got to start solving the problems around, reducing manual effort, reducing time to market, or you'll never get past the 5 use cases to the 500. I think that's pretty much my advice.
And something you said a little while ago, you mentioned data latency. And I know when it comes to personalization, right, everybody's talking about real time, but there's always like different definitions that every organization has around real time, or different use cases that have a different definition. I'm curious, how are you defining real time? And then how does that play into solving the personalization challenges?
Mm-hmm. I think it comes to like when you say that you want to have a real-time experience, I think if I could do a poll, I wonder, maybe just type the answers in the chat, but what is real-time to the group? Most people think real-time is instant, like in the next 1 minute, that is real-time. And that is probably the case and necessary for many, many use cases. And we've got data that we know that real time within the 1 minute produces a better conversion or better outcomes versus a 4-hour or a 10-hour or a 1-day latency. But sometimes real time does not have to be quick, and you'll be surprised. Teams are very happy with, in the next 2 hours, that's good, or in the next 4 hours, that's good. And sometimes you're actually constrained by the source data that you have. So even though you could react to a really quick signal that you receive, by the time you actually get that signal, it's actually a day old. So, I think it's important to think use case by use case, but also don't settle, because really the world is going to move to real time. And when you're designing what you're doing, like we've got to continue to imagine that real time will be the expectation. And when I say real time, I mean in 10 to 15 seconds. That's what I mean.
I think some of the points you brought up here are really critical, that I'm hoping is like sinking into some of the people on this call is, use case by use case, you have to determine what real time is, because it's also going to be critical to the customer experience, right? So like, do you really need something to happen instantaneously for that specific journey? Or is there some time fragments that can happen that delivers a better experience? But I do think you're right. I think we're coming to a point where we're seeing it now with like shipping, right? It used to be people could wait 5 to 7 days. Now they can't even wait 24 hours. And I think it's going to be a similar instance when it comes to digital, where there's going to be expectations around certain journeys where things just have to happen. And if they don't, it's going to make someone have a poor experience, potentially go to a competitor. So this is really becoming a hot topic, even though it was before, but even more so now, that I think people need to focus on. So throughout our sort of partnership together, right, WillowTree and the team, we've sort of come in and got things started and then let your team sort of run with stuff. And we've come in and out to support as needed. I'm very curious, through that time, what have you learned about sort of the implementation and maybe integration of these platforms that you think some of these other companies and sort of people on the call should consider up front?
Yeah, definitely. I think what I've learned along the way is to start with the clear vision of what you're trying to achieve and really paint the picture in tangible terms for your company, and that will help get more leadership buy-in. Show how what you're trying to do is different than today, and show it with tangible examples that probably the whole company is feeling the pain of those examples, that there's this broken customer experience over here, and if we could solve it this way, it would improve the customer experience. But not just the vision part. I think it's also having the benefits quantified as well. Really helps. Like, are you talking about a savings of $5,000 a month or $5,000 a day in some of these kind of costs? And that kind of thing could start to add up for your team. So that's one thing I've learned. Another thing I've learned is understand the costs that you're talking about across your entire stack and ecosystem. These tools are very powerful, but they come with costs, and you kind of have to figure out how to negotiate and manage the whole ecosystem of tools that you have. Which ones might you start moving away from and migrate over to new tools and better tools? But just have that cost picture in mind. And the third lesson that I've learned is to prepare for scale, because eventually, once you've done all of the hard selling and all of the discussions, and you've done those 2, 3, 5 initial use cases, the momentum will pick up, and it will pick up big. And you need to figure out what you will do when your little practice, your experimentation, turns from 5 use cases to 500 use cases. And that's actually where my team is at right now, just figuring out how we're going to intake, prioritize work, balance priorities across the team, but more importantly, how we're going to enable other teams to run on their own while we maintain a central governance and platform standards.
And if I may, adding on that, just as a little plug for us, I think something we've been also seeing is, like we've talked about, these tools are somewhat specialized, and so partnering with people who can sort of support the efforts, who have the knowledge. I mean, these are newer tools, right? Like, a lot of people are trying to learn them and get updated on them. And like you said, Joanne, like if you have experience with some of the other tools, it's a little bit easier of a learning curve. But I think trying to find some of those specialized skills in the market is a little difficult today. So being able to partner with someone who can support those in whichever capacity you sort of see fit, I think can really jumpstart your efforts and get you down the right road, rather than potentially taking the wrong path early and then sort of deviating as you go. So just want to add that in there. I kind of had to do my little sales spiel. And then really curious about what's next. Like, you guys have done a lot of stuff. You've moved really quickly, in my eyes, about getting the platforms, getting them implemented, getting them used. So what's next for your team and TELUS with these platforms?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're really looking at this in 2 categories. It's sort of like, what is the expansion of the platform that we can do across new channels? One of the big ones that we're looking at integrating this year now is integrating with the call center or the IVR. So being able to imagine a customer just did something online, can we send that signal to the call center so that if that customer decides to pick up the phone and call us right away, that the agent actually has that information, or better yet, the IVR has the information and can route the person to the correct agent right away. And also vice versa. Like, if someone has just called and then they're trying to do something on digital, how do we bridge those 2 things? We're also looking at expanding. We have a suite of apps in TELUS, and we've currently got the push and in-app practice working across one app, but we know that in order to reap the full benefits of all of this experience, we want to bring push and in-app messaging across our suite of apps and start to use the right app for the right reason, and truly give each customer the one message that's most important to them in that moment, at the right interface, at the right time. And one of the cool things we're exploring is integrating our messaging into the TV set-top box. So when a customer, like maybe we've had examples like if someone's at your door, maybe there's a little message that pops up on your TV that says, hey, someone's at your door. So we've got, I think, platform-wise, we've got a lot of capabilities ahead of us that we know will continue to expand and allow us to scale. And then we've also got a huge backlog of use cases that the more use cases we deliver and show and share, new ones arrive. And so I think what the theme I would say is that the use cases are going from more siloed to much more cross-organizational and much more omni-channel than before.
And I'm going to kind of put you on the spot here, but I'm just kind of curious. So like you've used a lot of these Adobe tools over the years. You've been leveraging them to do a lot within TELUS around personalization and other things. One of the things that I'm interested to hear is upfront, right? I'm a new company. I'm starting to think about these Adobe platforms. I want to start investigating them. What advice would you give to those people who are starting the Adobe journey that you have been on for a long time?
Oh, that's a good question, Tony. I think it would just be try to see the examples that other companies have done with these tools, but keep those examples in mind of what your company's goals are, and just stay curious and try stuff. Just experiment. If it doesn't work, and it's a short-lived experiment, or not a lot of customers got exposed to it, that's okay. But it'll allow you to just dabble and learn. And as you get more familiar with the tools and with what they can do, you'll have a little bit more incentive and also confidence to expand into something a bit bigger.
I have one more question, but I do want to remind sort of the group, please submit your questions. We want to be able to get to those as well. But this is sort of my closing question. It's kind of not related. It kind of is. I just like to ask this sometimes. What is the best piece of advice you've been given? Like something that you sort of like you hold on to, that you sort of bring into not every day, but like, what's that one piece of advice you got that you just sort of have held on to for years?
I think that the piece of advice for me is the idea of iteration. Coming into TELUS, I came into a company that was very much in these like 4 times a year IT releases, and this whole notion of iteration and agile and starting small and experimenting and optimizing from there is something that has really grounded me in every single thing that I do. That I do not need to launch a giant perfect thing. I just need to launch the first piece, and then a few weeks later the second piece and the third piece. And I feel like that is sort of just kind of one of my core ways that I operate that I think has helped me over the years.
I think that is tremendous advice, which I have seen go the other way many times, right? Where you want to try to bite off the whole thing right away, and it can lead you down some troubling roads. I am not great at what you're talking about. I always try to get better at that, but I do try to separate and piece out bigger things just to kind of help me along the way. So thank you for all of that. So again, if you guys have questions, please reach out. Jared, I'm going to kind of pass this back over to you. But if there's any questions out there burning right now, there's a Q&A area that you can submit some of your questions. We are more than happy to answer them with the time that we have remaining.
Awesome. Let's get into some Q&A. I have some questions for you here. What are some use cases to avoid when getting into these MarTech solutions?
That's a tough one. I'm going to start, but I don't know. I feel like avoid anything that doesn't seem to have a clear purpose or benefit. So that's my initial reaction when I hear that question. I think like if the person, like, let's say usually you're working with multiple teams, lots and lots of people have really great and really cool ideas. But if the idea doesn't seem to have a lot of quantifiable benefit, it's probably not the right one to go after first, because you might end up, doing a lot of work, integrating a lot of systems, maybe spending quite a lot of time. And at the end, you haven't really given back any kind of benefit to your organization in terms of its goals or KPIs. So I think like even if it's a very small contribution, that's okay. But if it's very unclear as to how it will contribute or how it will help, I would avoid those. That is my first reaction.
I would second to what Joanne was saying. I mean, I kind of first thing that came to mind too. I mean, there's going to be a lot of ideas when you start implementing these platforms, and people get really excited to do a lot with them because they think the busier you are with the platforms, the more value you're being shown. But it's really the impact that you're making. So just making sure that you're doing something small, iterative, like Joanna said, to start making that impact, to start building sort of that snowball effect. And then hopefully that just keeps continuing is really important. But I don't think there's any like specific use case I could think of that I would sort of say like steer clear of that one because you want to improve all of them, right?
Yeah. Gotcha. All right, up next here. When you're making this transition, what team members are impacted the most, and what team members need the most assistance?
So I think coming from inside TELUS, that the team members that are impacted the most are actually the team members who probably have been doing something one way for a really, really long time. And potentially they've been doing that in a little bit of more isolation from some of the other pieces. Like, for example, inside TELUS today, we have a team that handles push and in-app communications and a whole other team that handles email. And when we are trying to bring those two things together, it's back to that people, process, technology triangle that I was referencing at the beginning, that the people who are impacted, like maybe their job function is changing, or maybe the tools they're using are changing. But for me, it's really a people thing, and helping them understand the benefits of, we're moving to these new tools because it's going to be better for these reasons, and it's going to be better for you for these reasons, and help get those people involved along the way. Those are the roles that I think are affected the most. And it's actually good to sort of, as part of the North Star that you're planning out, you could always be imagining, what would the future mode of operations of our teams look like in a world where maybe push messages and emails are in the same team? Like, how would we do that? And then back to my iteration advice too, is sort of like, you don't have to decide everything all at once. You just sort of have to have a direction and be like, we're going this way, we're going to try this. And if it doesn't work, you can always tweak and evolve the new way.
You know what's interesting about these platforms is, in the past with MarTech, it was like marketing teams owned it, or data teams owned it, or technology teams owned it. But these new systems are sort of crossing all the lanes, right? And everybody has to own like a piece of it. So I think it's a very interesting thing, even for me to like see from my point of view of how these teams interact, right? Because usually there's tension between some of them usually, and now they need to play nicely together. So there's this like new sort of like change outside of the platforms that has to come together across the teams that are involved to start working together in a better way that they may not have to traditionally be involved in. So I think, future state, it's the technology, but it's really like, to Joanne's point, that sort of triangle, right? How do you get all of those things aligned cross-functionally to make these things work well?
Mm-hmm. But on the flip side, I have seen that when teams that historically were not working too closely together have started to, they like, I hear things like, oh, like we should have been talking for years. Like there's so many things that we could be doing together and that is better together. And it's quite rewarding to like be part of breaking down some of those organizational silos and, you know, bringing people together. And I think you actually end up with a better experience for the customer than you otherwise would have.
Gotcha. All right, I think we got time for another question here. Going back to those iterations that you're speaking about before, Joanne, do you find that organizations reach their scale goal, or do you find that it's better for them to keep moving forward and keep searching for the stars, as it were?
Personally, I'm in sort of a we're never done mindset. That, you know, there's always somewhere else to go. There's always something else to try and something else to do. So I don't look at it as that we're done. When I was part of standing up the A/B testing practice in TELUS, you could have said, okay, well, everybody knows how to run A/B tests. Everybody is running them by themselves. They don't need help. But that actually was not done. That was the start of a whole new chapter, which was like personalization and then outbound messaging. And I don't even know what's next. Well, but yeah, we're never done.
Yeah. All right. And with that, I know Tony had some closing remarks.
Yes. So Adobe Summit's coming up. I'm sure, hopefully, some of the people on this call are going. WillowTree will be there. Our booth number is 1127. Joanne will actually be joining us again Tuesday morning before keynote of the 27th with one of her colleagues to talk about overcoming organizational and data readiness challenges. So if you're there, please come for that. And then after this, if there are any questions that come up or you want to reach out, please reach out to the WillowTree team on the website, or feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. Happy to do what I can there. And then we have a link to our site about our Adobe Summit events and presentations that hopefully we'll be sharing in the audience chat. But I just want to thank everybody for being here. Joanne, thank you so much for your time and information. I hope everybody got a lot of insight from it.
Yeah. Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Joanne, for your time. Thank you to Adobe and WillowTree for sponsoring today's webinar. And last but not least, thanks to all of you in the audience for your time and attention today. Today's webinar has been recorded, so you'll be receiving a link to that recording in a follow-up email, so keep an eye on your inbox for that. In the meantime, thank you all once again, and we will see you on the next one.